This is a walkthrough of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. First thing I'm going to do is just kind of show you around all the buttons on the camera. So starting with the front, the only thing that's really on the camera is a record button. You probably won't ever need to use this. It might be a little bit easier to reach from the front. There's a second one up there. The main record button is right here. There's also a button for stills if you want to take a still photo, but the video button will be the most commonly used one. On the front, there's a dial, which we'll get into more later, but this is used for changing some of the camera settings. I'm going to spin it around here and show the top. So the top has three shortcuts right here for commonly used settings, so ISO, shutter speed, and white balance. There's your power switch for the camera, just off and on right there. And then these three function buttons can be programmed to whatever you like. So there's lots of different shortcuts and functions you can use, and those can be set in the menu for things like autofocus or changing color settings and things like that. On the back of the camera, we've got two buttons up here that turn on some automatic controls. The top one is auto exposure, and the bottom one is autofocus. So these cameras are meant primarily to be used in manual mode, which is how they should be left most of the time. That'll just ensure that you don't get your focus and your brightness and things like that changing over time, which looks pretty unprofessional. So typically you'll leave them in manual mode, and you can press these to on demand tell the camera, hey, I want you to figure out what the brightness should be, and it will do that for you, and then you go put it back into manual mode. Same with autofocus, you can press that and it'll focus the camera and then hold it still. Moving down here, we've got HFR is high frame rate. This is only used for shooting slow motion, so likely won't be used in this case, but just so you know what it is. The magnifying glass will zoom in to whatever's on the screen to help you focus. It only zooms in the preview though, not in the footage itself. So this is just for a useful tool for the operator of the camera to be able to more clearly see what's in focus. Finally, we've got a menu button right here, which will access the main menus of the camera. And the last button is to play back footage that you've recorded in the camera. On the left side, we have various ports. These will typically all be covered up by these little covers here, but they're taken out just so we can show them more easily. So starting from top to bottom, we've got a microphone input, we've got a headphone jack, HDMI port, so your main video signal out of the camera. This one that's plugged in right now is the power cable that comes with the camera. You could run it on a power cable or battery. The batteries don't last all that long, so it's preferable to use the power input when you can. A USB port, which can connect the camera to a computer or to a hard drive for recording. And then finally, there's a mini XLR audio input. So similar to this one, but this is more appropriate for professional grade microphones, whereas the jack up top is more for consumer level microphones. On the right side, we have the media storage. So this is for your memory cards. There's a SD card slot and also a CFast. CFast cards are generally higher capacity and much faster, but they're also much more expensive. So we're recommending you start out with standard SD cards. They have to be a U3 speed in order to work with the higher quality video. As long as it says U3, it's good to go. And that just goes right in the slot there. Push it in and it clicks. And close up the door. Finally, there's a battery compartment on the bottom. To open this, there's a little tab here. You can push that to the left, and the door is spring-loaded. It'll kind of open up by itself. Grab a Canon LPE6 compatible battery. Push that in till that little tab down there clicks. And then push the door closed. And that is, I believe, everything on the camera. Yeah, that's about it.
Good. All right, next video. Okay, we are doing a camera settings video.
All right, let me just get that at least slightly in focus and reasonably well exposed so the screen looks decent.
Okay, where are you going to be doing the settings from? Right there? Or
I can be flexible, whatever works for you.
Hold it in like, yeah, just want to make, yeah, it looks great. Good. Perfect.
Okay.
Oh, it looks good.
There's no glare on the screen or anything?
No, it's perfect.
Awesome.
Hit the focus button, and we're good.
So how much in depth do you want to go? Because there's a lot of, okay, like everything?
Everything.
You got it?
Yeah, I want to go, let's just do a pro version. And if someone can't quite figure that out, screw them.
Okay, that's what YouTube's for.
All right, awesome, Steven. And action.
All right, so we're going to be going over the settings and the menus and layout of the whole interface on the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. So we'll just start off going from left to right up here. The very top left button, the kind of frame icon up there, this is a variety of different overlays and tools that you can use to help you get exposure, check focus, and things like that. So when you click on this menu, it pops up that bar on the bottom. The first one that comes up is zebras. This is an exposure tool that highlights in that kind of slashed pattern there anything that's over a certain brightness. So in this case, it's set to 95%. So what that's telling me is that this area on that lemon is really, really bright, and it's almost bright enough to make me lose detail and lose clarity in that part of the image. So what I would want to do in this case, I know that that's a little bit too bright, so I'm going to want to change my shutter speed to correct for that. So we'll get into how to do that in a bit, but that's what that tool shows you. This one is focus peaking. So you might notice on the avocado there's a little bit of a red kind of outline on some of that. Let me zoom in here to see it better. So the little red areas show you parts of the image that are sharp in focus. So sometimes it can be hard to tell, especially on smaller screens, exactly what part of the image is sharp. That's a way to highlight in a color of your choosing what that looks like. So right here we're just setting the strength. So low means that it'll have to be super, super sharp in order for it to be highlighted. You can go to medium, which is the default, or high, which will have a lot more of the image showing up. So the higher settings make it easier to see, but can sometimes lead to sort of false positives, where it'll also highlight things that are close but not quite in focus. So medium tends to work best. If you find it hard to see, then high could be a better option. Next one over is frame guides. I'm going to double click to zoom out again to see the whole image. So frame guides are going to show you if you're planning to crop the image when you edit, but you want to record it at a larger size. This lets you preview what that crop will look like. So if I turn that on, see the black bars turned on top and bottom? So that's showing a 2.4:1 crop. And then you can use the slider to adjust different crop ratios all the way down to 1:1 and even 4:5. So these are great for if you're shooting things for Instagram, for example, which prefers 1:1 and 4:5. So this lets you preview what that crop will look like. And yet you still have the whole image recorded in case you need that when you edit. Next one over, these are your composition guides. So you've got thirds, horizon, crosshair, and dot. Thirds is your classic rule of thirds sort of tic-tac-toe board. And this is useful for helping arrange your shot to look more natural. Typically you want areas of interest that you want to highlight to be on one of those intersection points. So something like that for the lemon here, I've got that nicely within that cross mark, so that'll be a nice natural composition. You can do horizon. This is a sort of digital level that will show you, so there's the two crosses, and as I tilt the camera, they are moving away from one another. So once they're lined up, I know that the camera is level and it's pointed straight. If it's leaning to one side, you can see it goes off center. And that's a very useful tool for setting up your tripod. Crosshair is just a mark right in the center. If you want something to be perfectly centered, that's an excellent way to check that. And the dot is, again, just a little tiny dot right in the middle. And you can turn on multiple of these at the same time. So there I've got the thirds and horizon. I can do the thirds and the crosshair. So you can do lots of different combinations of these as you like. The next one over here is a safe area. So this kind of is a bit of an antiquated tool at this time because this was really more relevant in like analog broadcast TV. But you can set a safe area, which is just a margin that comes in from all sides. And it's useful if you plan to crop your image in post-production or do things like stabilizers in your editing software, because those will all crop in a little bit. So this lets you kind of preview what a certain crop would look like so you know how much room you have to play with. And last but not least, we have false colors. And this just makes all the colors go wonky, but it does so in a very specific way that's very useful. So it shows you by color coding the whole image how bright different parts are. So we can probably edit in a screenshot, I can give it to you, that shows exactly what the colors represent.
All right. That's my editing point.
Excellent. Edit it there, please. But this shows you, so for example, the blue and purple regions are very dark. Purple being dark enough that it's likely not going to have any detail there. And then yellow and red are very bright regions. So these are things where you should be really concerned about how much light is on that. You can see if I just put my hand over it so it's in shadow, it cuts away a lot of that light and it's no longer bright red. And I'm just holding my hand up there to keep it out of the light. So if I turn that off, you'll see that's very bright. The zebras are also telling us that. And then that purple and blue area down there was that TV that's black. So shows you that it's dark enough that you should be worried about possibly losing data. That's it for the first button in the menu. Did you want to roll the rest of these all at once?
Yeah, I can always cut. It's perfect.
Cool. So the rest of these are much simpler. That's by far the most in-depth option on the front page. These are all just your basic settings for the camera. So your frame rate on the top left, 29.97 is standard for most every kind of video that you're likely to shoot. So that should basically stay as it is. If you wanted to change that, you just click it, and you have a slider right here to adjust your frame rate. There's also off speed. This does this.
Just back up. So I always want you're showing, and in all of these settings, and this is what I would do. So you're showing it.
Okay.
I would also love to have, and this is what I would do. If you're setting it up to shoot like content videos, so most of those would be content videos for these people, and I recommend shooting it. I would love to have like that level of like certainty in here.
Okay. Yeah, so I did mention that 29.97 is standard, but I'll also say that that's what I'd recommend.
Okay.
Yeah, so for all these different things, they're useful for different applications. So 23.98 and 24 are standard for film. 25 is standard in Europe. And then 29.97 and 30 are standard for America. And then these higher frame rates are really not that useful unless you want to shoot slow motion. So what I would do, because it's standard and because it's easy to work with, 29.97 is your go-to option for social media content, for videos that you plan to sell for courses. It's really the best option. There's also the off-speed frame rate down here. This is a more advanced setting because this will actually do the slow motion effect in camera. So for example, if I'm set to 29.97 frames per second, if I turn on off speed, I can now choose a second frame rate. And what that will do is, let's say I'm shooting at 60, it'll record 60 frames per second, but it will save it in a file that's 29.97 frames per second. So when you import that file to your editing software or play it back in the camera, it will already have a slow motion applied to it. Similarly, I can record like a time lapse. I can go all the way down to 5 frames a second, for example. And that will record 5 frames per second, but save it at 29.97. So this video clip would play back at a much faster rate, effectively being a time lapse. And that is the same thing as pressing the high frame rate button. The HFR button simply turns on and off high speed. I'm going to turn that off there. Yep. Next setting over is your shutter speed. This has a variety of presets in here of commonly used shutter speeds. A good rule of thumb is that your shutter speed should be double whatever your frame rate is. So in this case, we're at 29.97, so my shutter speed should be 1/60. If I was shooting at 60 frames per second, I would want my shutter speed to be 1/120. So just take your shutter speed, double it, and make that the denominator of this fraction. So that's why 1/60 is right in the middle there, because that is by far the best option to use. That'll keep natural looking motion blur, it won't be too stuttery, and it'll have nice fluid motion. This also has an auto exposure setting. So for all of your exposure controls, there will be an auto on or off switch right here. If I turn that on, the camera is now automatically controlling the shutter. And you can also change the priority in which these things happen. So the camera can automatically control your shutter speed and your iris. And this will select shutter plus iris will affect your shutter first and leave the iris as it is set already as much as it can. Or the opposite is true for iris plus shutter. So it depends on which one you want to prioritize. If you'd rather keep your shutter speed where it is and let the iris change, then you would choose shutter plus iris, because in that case, it'll change your shutter speed first and leave your iris the same as much as possible. But again, usually it's preferred to leave auto exposure off, unless you're in a situation where the light is changing drastically, rapidly. You might want to turn it on if you're walking around outside or something like that. But as long as you're indoors in a controlled environment, leave that turned off, because it just looks much more professional if your shutter speed isn't changing all over the place. So I'm going to set that back to 1/60 just for now. Next option is your iris, and that's just a slider to change the aperture size of your lens. Iris and aperture mean the same thing. Iris is just the sort of filmmaking professional video term, but it's exactly the same as an aperture. And again, that auto exposure button works exactly the same way. Next we have ISO. So ISO is just the sensitivity of the camera to light. So the higher the number is, the brighter your image will appear. However, it'll also appear more grainy and more fuzzy. So the ideal setting for this particular camera is 400. In a perfect world, you should never shoot anything aside from 400. It gets you the best color detail, the best overall range of how much light it can capture. If you need to, for example, if you're shooting outdoors, you might want to go down to like 100 or 200 to compensate for being in very bright sunlight. And if you're shooting at nighttime, you might need to go up to get the brightness that you need in a dark situation. But as much as you can, leave it at 400, and that'll give you the best quality. Next up, we have white balance. So across the top part of this menu, you've got a bunch of different presets. So you got sunlight, artificial tungsten light, fluorescent light, shadow, a cloudy day. CWB is custom white balance. I'll show you how to set that in a minute. And then AWB is automatic white balance. And when you click the automatic white balance button, it pops up this page, which will let you take something white or gray. I happen to have my water bottle here, which will work just fine. So you want to pick something that's a neutral color. So a white, gray, something in that range. And then position it so that that box is completely filled with that neutral color. Hit update white balance. And it'll look at that color and adjust the white balance by itself to make it match gray. And with that done, all of the other colors in the scene should now look natural. So the best option would be to go through your white balance here, and you'll see it's now on custom white balance, because all the automatic white balance function does is set these settings in your custom settings to match what they should be for that scene. So the best way to do this is to go into automatic white balance, hold up something white or gray, hit that automatic white, or hit the update white balance button, as I just did, and that will set these values in your custom white balance to be what they should be. So we've got the white balance and the tint over here. That's the same as the display up there. So clicking either of those will bring up that same menu. And the last button on the top right is a little tiny button there, and you might barely be able to see it change there. So that shows AC right now. That's the power source for the camera. So AC is the alternating current power cable coming in the side. If you click that, it'll show the voltage coming in. So this is useful if you're powering it from an external battery. You could tell how full that battery is by looking at that. And this will also show you if you use a battery installed in the camera, it'll show you the voltage of that battery too, as a way to tell how much battery life is left. I'm gonna take a break and get some more water.
Okay, this is the back of the camera settings. Talk about how you even got to this menu as well before we start.
Yes, I was actually just gonna say I'll start from here. All right, so from the sort of main recording screen on the camera, To access the menus at any time, the second button up from the bottom has your kind of 3 lines across it. That's your menu. So we'll just click that, and that pulls up the menu. Across the top here, you've got different sort of categories for what your settings are. So these are all the settings that pertain to the recording. Right here is your audio settings and so forth. So we'll just start at the top and go through these in order. So this gets really technical, and frankly, a lot of it just isn't that important. I'll kind of just give you the preferred settings for this camera, and we'll sort of leave it there. So for codec, we're going to prefer Blackmagic RAW. The reason for that is it is a RAW codec, which means you get a lot more quality and a lot more range of the colors that it can capture. ProRes is sort of an older standard that a lot of cameras still use, but the quality is not as good as RAW, and it's actually also larger files. So RAW is really the best of both worlds because you get better quality and smaller files, so you can fit more on your memory card, and also it takes up less space on your computer to store it. We're going to stick with constant bitrate and choose 8:1. So these numbers here just show how much compression is applied. So 3:1 is the highest quality that we can choose, and 12:1 is the lowest quality. In my testing, using lots of different Blackmagic cameras, including using this exact camera professionally for 2 years, I found that 8:1 is the best compromise. You lose no quality, really, as far as I can tell, between any of these. At 12:1, you can lose a little bit of quality in some cases, so I usually stick with 8:1 for professional work. But frankly, for a lot of social media content where people are going to watch it on small screens like their phones, you can get away with 12:1 just fine. So it's up to you. I personally do 8:1 if you're worried about data space. 12:1 is smaller files, but I would do 8:1. For resolution, Ultra HD is going to be your best bet. Anything else will crop the sensor if you go to the lower qualities down here. And these higher qualities are just, they're not standard frame sizes for social media videos, so they'll end up getting cropped anyway. So Ultra HD is your best choice. The second page, there's these arrows on the right and left side of the frame. These are different pages, as you can see by the dots down there. They're different pages of the same menu. So this would be page 2 of the record menu. This lets you choose your dynamic range. So this is how much contrast is in the image. Since we're shooting RAW, this is not permanently applied to the footage. When you go to edit, you can change this after the fact, and there's no difference in quality. Video tends to give you the best preview. So if I switch back to, I'm just going to press the shutter button on the camera. That'll actually start recording, so we're going to use this as a test clip. But you can also get out of the menu just by clicking that menu button again. So this is a test shot of the video setting. I'm going to go and hit that menu button again and switch it to film. And you'll notice this looks much more washed out. And the reason for that is it's recording with greater dynamic range, which means there's more of a difference between the darkest point and the brightest point that it can capture. Again, the camera's recording the full quality anyway. This is sort of just a preset look preview, if you will, that's applied so you can see what it will look like in the end. So video is going to give you the most contrast. It's going to look most like a finished product. My preference is extended video, which is a compromise between the two. So this will retain a little bit more detail in the bright and dark areas. So it makes it a little bit easier to see those details when you're setting up a shot. But again, you have the full quality to work with no matter what setting you choose. These can all be changed after the fact while you edit. The next option here is sensor area. Because we're shooting RAW, it's going to match whatever setting this is anyway. So this setting is not available while shooting RAW, so just ignore that one. The project frame rate is exactly the same as the frame rate that we already talked about up here. So actually, if I change this, you'll see in the menu, it now changes to that same value. And likewise, I can change it here, and that change is reflected up there. So same control, it's just in 2 different places. Same is applied for off-speed recording. So you got this switch right here. In the frame rate switch, we have another, or in the frame rate menu, there's another switch there. And again, that high frame rate button, it's all the same thing. So this is just a shortcut to turn it on or off. But to change the setting, again, you'll want to be in that frame rate menu and change it here. And once again, that's the off-speed frame rate, so if I turned it on, I could change it here, but I find it's easiest to do that from this menu because it gives you a nice little slider and it's just a better user interface overall. So I'm going to turn that back off and back into the menu. On the bottom of page 2, we've got the preferred card for recording. So we only have one card installed, so it'll be defaulting to that card, which is the SD card. If you have a preference of recording on CFast or SD, you can choose that here. But in this case, we're going to keep it simple, one card, and record onto that. The last setting over here is record stop if drops frame. What that means is sometimes with lower quality memory cards, if it's not able to keep up with the recording, it'll do what's called dropping a frame, which is where the memory card is just not capable of saving that much data, and it'll just not be able to keep up, so it loses track. So with this turned on, the camera will stop recording entirely if it notices that that failed. This is a preferred setting for professional work because if I'm shooting, a commercial or a film or something, I want to know that there was a problem. And if you're using cards that are recommended by Blackmagic, you'll never run into this issue. This really only applies if you're using, cheaper cards. If you just had one laying around from an old camera that's not fast enough, you might run into a problem. So I would leave that turned on just so that way you know that there was a problem. You can turn it off if you want. I don't recommend it because then you could have errors in your footage that you won't be aware of. But the advantage is if you're going to be away from the camera for a long time, this will do a better job of keeping it rolling no matter what. So if you turn it on and you walk away from the camera, leaving this off might be a good idea because then it'll at least try to keep recording. But I would leave this setting turned on so that the camera stops recording in the event of an error. And last page under record, we've got time-lapse mode. If we turn this on, then you can it'll capture one frame every, in this case, 10 frames. So the higher we set this, you see we're getting up into the 10-minute range. So that'll be one frame every 10 minutes, or you can go down to a certain number of frames. And the last couple things in here, we've got detail sharpening and apply LUT in file. So detail sharpening is just going to be a little bit of boost to the sharpness. This is another setting that can be changed in post-production, so we're still recording raw. This is just going to bring it into your editing software with a preset level of sharpness applied. You can always turn it off, you can always add more, but this is just the default. So I would leave it at medium. It tends to be a good balance. It does a good job of retaining details without looking overly processed. And last but not least, apply LUT in file. Leave this turned on. And the reason for that is we'll talk about LUTs later, but this will make sure that whatever color settings you have to preview in the camera match what you see on the computer. I'm gonna drink some more water.
All right.
All right, so going across the bottom of the main display here, we've got a histogram. So if you're familiar with the tool in photography, this works exactly the same way for video. So it shows on the left side of the graph is black, on the right side is white, and then inside the graph itself shows how many pixels in the image are of that brightness. So I can look at this right now and see there's that big spike sort of in about the middle, but a little bit less in the middle. So that big spike probably represents this wall right here, which is all kind of a dark gray. And I can tell that because if I look more at that wall, see there's more pixels. It gets kind of taller and wider. So this is a way to see if there's a really bright or dark part of an image. It'll help you notice that and tell whether it's dangerously close to the edges. Again, the preferred tool is false color. That will show you in a much more visual way. But if you want to keep that preview without your colors getting all messed up, this is a great tool to just take a quick glance at and just make sure that things are in the right ballpark. Next to that is the record start stop button. It's pretty self-explanatory. You click it, it starts recording. Click again and it stops. That's all there is to it. The next two are two memory cards, or I should say recording devices. So as standard, these are the two memory card slots in the side of the camera. So we only have one installed right now, which is why there's only one that's lit up right here. I say recording devices and not cards necessarily, because you also have the option of, through that USB port, you can plug in a solid state drive like a Samsung T5. Those are what I use. And that will also show up in here and let you see, if you click on that, you see both cards right here. This shows you how much space is left, so 127 gigs remaining. And at your current settings, how many minutes of recording time you have left. This is also where you format your cards. So see right here, we have Format C fast card, but that's not available because the card is not installed. But we do have Format SD card. So if I click on that, you'll choose your format. If you're on a Mac, use OS X Extended. If you're on Windows, use exFAT. Aside from that, there's no difference between them. It's just more easily supported on those systems. The real numbers, I probably wouldn't worry about. These will be automatically numbered. Every time you format the card, the number increments. So when I format it right now, it should format to A001, A being the camera number, which you can also change in the settings. And then if I format it a second time, it'll be A002. So that helps you keep track of, one, how many times the card's been formatted, and two, it'll help you keep track of the order your clips were shot, because that number is also saved in the file name of each clip. So if you're shooting a longer project with multiple cards, you can easily tell what order they were shot. So to do the formatting, we're running Macs here, so OS X Extended. I run Windows at my studio, so you'll just choose whichever one is appropriate for your computers. Format the card, confirm that you want to name it, and then press and hold this for 3 seconds. And that's done. So, I was slightly mistaken on the name. So the name of the card is SD card 1002. So camera 1, and because I just formatted it, it bumped the number up, so that's number 2. Yep, and we can see that there's the name of the card, so our 1002. And that's in slot 2, which is the SD card built in the camera. You can see how much recording space is left, the number of clips, and the format is OS X Extended for the Mac. So we can exit that. And then the last setting up here is your audio. This is not the full audio settings. What it will give you is a real quick volume slider for each. So this is your channel 1, channel 2, and your headphones volume. And these are just sliders that move across like that. So the full audio settings are located under this menu button here. There are a couple pages down though, so it'll be a minute before we get to that. But we'll start out just going through the recording settings here. This is going to be a mouthful.
Let's take a break. Let's do a little bit of action.
All right, so that's it for peaking versus colored lines. Again, my preference is peaking. You might find that colored lines are easier to see, so that's just up to you, whatever you prefer. And the last thing on here, again, these are all settings that are just there in the menu up here as well, just in a different place if you prefer to reach them here. The only one that is different is this 1.33 times anamorphic de-squeeze. This is for crazy expensive cinema lenses that have anamorphic glass in them. It doesn't matter, don't worry about it, just leave it turned off. Next up is audio. So this is where we choose the sources. We have meters and then the volume for each one. So typically we're going to be using either the 3.5 millimeter jack right there or the mini XLR mic connector right there. The camera does also have built-in microphones, which are quite excellent for a camera, especially in this price range. They actually sound pretty nice. But of course, you're going to get much better quality sound with a lavalier or shotgun mic or something else like that. So up here for each channel, for source 1 and for channel 2, you can choose your source. So if I go to XLR mic, if we had a mic plugged in, we would now be seeing the volume coming in and have the ability to change that volume right here. So these really you can just go through and see. So for example, here's camera mono. So it's taking both mics in the camera, mixing them down to mono, and there's the volume. So if I snap in front of it, you can see that. And this volume, of course, will affect how loudly that sound is recorded. So there is going to be really loud, well into the red. For general speaking, you're going to want to be basically right in the middle of the yellow at the loudest point. So your signal should be about, that's a little low, so if I continue talking here, I'm going to get closer so we can actually see it. This is still a little low. Most microphones that you plug in will be much louder than this, but ideally you'd want that to be right in the kind of the threshold between the green and yellow. These settings are exactly the same just for your second channel. And then right here we have headphones volume and speaker volume. So there's a little speaker built in the camera for when you play back your footage. There's your volume control for that. We also have XLR power for XLR phantom power for microphones. So if I choose a microphone input right here, let's see, so XLR mic, this will now let me turn that on and provide power to a microphone that's plugged into the side. But since we're not using that, we'll leave that turned off. If you have a condenser microphone or a shotgun microphone, you'll want to have this turned on so that the microphone has power. For all other types of microphones, leave that turned off. And finally down here, we have two different loudness standards for the meters. -20 is standard, -18 is there as an option because some people prefer that. -20 is standard, that'll give you the most accurate measurements that match what your editing software shows. So leave it on -20. That is it for the audio in there. So this one is a setup page. This is all of your super basic, core functionality of the camera, date and time, language, things like that. We have an adjustment in here for shutter angle versus shutter speed. Again, this is a personal preference thing, just how you prefer to look at it. If you're coming from a photography background, leave it at shutter speed because that'll be all the controls that you're used to. Or shutter angle, and I'll show you what these do in a minute. Shutter angle is standard for film and cinema. It's back with the film days. So if you're doing a movie, something like that, you might prefer shutter angle. The only difference here is shutter speed is going to be the 1/60th that we're used to seeing. Shutter angle will show 180 degrees. And the rule that I shared about having the shutter speed be double of your frame rate, that's essentially what 180-degree shutter angle means. So if I leave it at shutter angle and I leave that at 180, then if I change my frame rate, you'll see the image gets darker or brighter if I do a slower rate. And that's because it's automatically changing that shutter speed to match essentially double the frame rate. So this is a very, very convenient feature. Most cameras don't have this. This is actually a super high-end cinema camera type feature that's included here. I find it much easier to work with this. However, if you're comfortable with traditional photography using shutter speed, then you might prefer to leave that. Generally though, I would leave it at shutter angle, leave it at that default 180, and you never have to worry about your shutter speed again. We have a flicker-free setting. So in some cases, especially with fluorescent lights, your lights might flicker. This is a built-in tool to reduce that. And in America, 60 hertz power is standard. If you're in a European country or some other place that has 50 hertz power, you'll want to change it there. But again, for America, we'll do 60 hertz. Finally, we have image stabilization. So if your lens has a stabilizer built in, this has a control to turn that on or off. Generally, if you're walking around or moving the camera, you'll want to leave that turned on. It just smooths out all the bumps. If it's sitting on a tripod, not going anywhere, I would turn it off because it'll just save a little bit of power and you don't run the risk of it accidentally thinking that it moved and jerking the footage around. Finally, we have timecode drop frame, which is a very antiquated standard that really is not used at all anymore. They have it in there just for backwards compatibility's sake, but it really should never be used for current productions. Now here's some of the fun stuff. I mentioned those 3 function buttons on the top of the camera. This is where we get to choose what they do. So you've got function 1, function 2, and function 3. All of the settings for these are exactly the same options. So I'll show you with function 1, but you can do the same options for function 2 and function 3. So right now, you can choose for function button 1 whether it behaves as a preset or as a toggle. So the difference between these is if I do a preset, For example, let's say that I often shoot in a particular location and I know what that white balance is at for the lighting in that room. Maybe I know for sure that the lighting is exactly 20 or say it exactly 3000 Kelvin. What'll happen now is every time I push that function 1 button, it'll load up 3000 Kelvin as my white balance setting. So right now it's at 5750 with a tint of 16. If I press that function 1 button, it'll immediately change to 3000. So this is a great way if you already have your studio set up with a certain color temperature of lighting, you know exactly what that is, you can just hit that button and your lighting's perfect every time. Similar story for all of the other settings. If I know that my ISO should be 400 because that's ideal for this camera, you can change that right there. My ISO is already 400, so I'll make it something different just to demonstrate. Now, as soon as I press function 1, ISO changes to 400. And similar for the other settings here. The other option is toggle. And what this will let you do is toggle a certain setting on or off. So in this case, it's defaulted to false color. So now, on the screen, all I have to do is hit function 1, and false color turns on. Hit it again, and it turns off. So this is an excellent way to sort of trigger things to happen where you don't have to dig into the menu. As far as cinema cameras go, these are incredibly intuitive and simple menus as it is, but I know it can be a little bit tedious to maybe remember what these icons mean. So if you don't want to have to do that, you can just hit the preview right there. Or the function button, I mean, right there. All right, and last thing here, remember in the monitor menu, we have the choice between LCD and HDMI for those settings. Well, the same thing goes here. So let's say that if I'm setting up for a live stream or for recording through the HDMI port, I might not want that false color to pop up on that HDMI. So with this highlighted, it'll do that false color on the LCD, but not the HDMI. If I click that, it'll do it on both. But typically you'd want to leave the HDMI off for all of these, just so that way you don't mess up what's going out there. So the display LUT, I'll turn that off on the HDMI. I don't want to accidentally mess with those settings. And same for frame guides, turn all that off on the HDMI. That way you don't accidentally change something on the HDMI port. Now these...
Would you go into setup, and could we set up how to do autofocus for one of the functions? Can you do that or not?
It would appear that I was wrong.
You can't do it. I didn't think so either. I tried.
Yeah.
I didn't see it anywhere. Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
It's a bummer. It's fine. I thought you could do it. You can't. So
Yeah.
Fine.
I thought you could too.
Yeah,
I looked
it up and tried. And, okay.
I think only like 3 of my 10 lenses even have autofocus. So it's not really something I
totally.
usually rely on.
No focus pullers around here, okay?
Yeah, one day. All right, so on to the next page of the setup menu. We've got the tally light. So on the front of the camera, there's this little guy right here. It's actually a light that will turn on while the camera is recording, or if it's plugged into an ATEM switcher. If this camera is the camera that's live, that light will turn on. So this lets you change whether or not that occurs. If I turn the light off, then whenever I start recording or if the camera's live, that light will not turn on. I would leave that on just because it's really convenient to be able to take a quick look. So you got a nice bright red light there. If I had a memory card plugged in, I would show you. But take my word for it, it's a nice bright light. Maybe we can edit it in a picture. Okay. Do you want to clap as your marker to edit?
I have to go through this still, but anyways.
Okay.
I will record that happening.
Sounds good. And then here's the brightness for that tally light. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Just adjust how powerful that light is when it's in use. Down here, we've got the hardware ID. So this is basically a serial number for the camera. Lets you identify which options, I'm just kind of rambling. I don't know what it means, so you can cut that part. We have the software version right here. So this is which version of the whole Blackmagic software is running on the camera. There's very often feature updates for these cameras that will include upgraded settings, more options in the camera. In some cases, they even improved image quality. That's happened a couple of times for Blackmagic cameras. So as you do software updates, that will reflect the software that's on the camera. And then under playback here, this will let you choose between all clips or single clip. This is another setting where maybe it's nice to have, but I don't really get why you'd want a single clip to be played back only. What this means is when you hit that play button to preview footage that you've recorded previously on the camera, if it's all clips, you can go through everything on the card and play it all. If it's single clip, it's just the one clip. I don't get why that's useful, just leave it on all clips. Next page, we have Bluetooth. So a great feature of these cameras is they can actually be controlled from a mobile device like an iPad via Bluetooth. So if you want to use that feature, you can turn that on, and then we can go ahead and connect a device through your other mobile device. And there's a Blackmagic camera control app that will have all of your shutter speed, white balance, start and stop recording, all those features there. It's pretty awesome, especially if the camera is going to be permanently mounted somewhere. You might want to leave Bluetooth turned on so that you can change settings without having to touch the back of the camera. And the last page over here, we've got factory reset. So if at any point something's just not right with the camera and you don't know what, you can hit that and that will just reset all of the settings in the camera to their defaults. We have pixel remapping. This is a really advanced feature. So if at some point the sensor of the camera gets damaged or there's some, a scratch or something like that, you can remap pixels. And this will basically calibrate the sensor. So you put a lens cap on to make sure that it's perfectly black image that the camera sees. And when you hit that remap button, it'll basically scan the whole image sensor for any errors and then create its own fancy software magic to correct for those errors while it's recording. In this case, they're brand new cameras and there's no issue with them, so we don't need to do that. But if you ever notice that there's like a scratch or a spot, step one is to clean everything, make sure it's nice and clean. If it turns out to be damage on the sensor, you can remap it and that will correct that error. And last but not least, we can recalibrate the motion sensor. So this is the sensor that's used for image stabilization and also for that little gyroscope guy right here. Let's see, where was that? So our horizon. Oh, it's much easier to see with the lens cap on. So all that setting that shows how much the camera is tilted. If that ever becomes inaccurate for some reason, you can just set the camera down on a nice level surface. You can see there it's lined up perfectly, so we know that ours is set right. But if you set it down on a flat surface and it is showing you that the camera is tilted, you can recalibrate that sensor here. So right here is the presets page. This is one of my favorite features on Blackmagic cameras. What this will do is save every single setting in the entire menu to a preset. So once you have a setup for your space that works well, it's all matched to your lighting, you can hit the plus button and type in a name for it. So we'll just call this one Studio. Hit update, and right there's a preset. So if I go in here and just mangle these settings, just make everything in the world wrong with it. Take off my lens cap so you can see. So it's way too dark, the color temperature is terrible. If I go back in that menu and click this preset and hit the check mark, it loads that preset. And now everything's, well, not great because it wasn't set up correctly to begin with, but it loads up all those settings the same way they were before. And that does essentially every setting in the entire menu all at once. So this is an absolutely fantastic way to not only be able to recall settings that work right, but if you have multiple Blackmagic cameras, you can actually save these to a memory card. So this button right down here lets you send and receive them from a memory card. So in this case, I don't have a memory card plugged in right now, but if you did, you could export those or we can import them. And with a memory card plugged in, you can choose them. It'll be a menu just like this. You can choose which preset you'd like to do and bring that in the camera. So I could export this one, plug that card into a second Blackmagic camera and import it to that one, and all the settings would match perfectly. Would you rather have a card installed so we could demonstrate that?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Can walk down the stairs quietly, please?
Hello. Awesome. And for the Ursa, which has 5 memory card slots total, I leave these to record on. I'd leave a just small jump card. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. But yeah, just leave it in there to save your presets too.
Okay, let's say that you just put in a new card, you want to format it. Let's just do a really quick formatting
Sure.
video.
So I'm going to do, actually, give me just a minute. I'm going to turn off a lot of these to make it look better. And it would appear that I left it in time lapse. So let's do a non-time lapse.
Moving from record to monitor.
All right, so second section of the menu is monitor. So first things first, let me start off by saying everything under the record setting has some effect on the file that's saved to the memory card. The opposite is true for monitor. Everything in here only affects the previews that you see on this monitor and on the HDMI out. Everything on here has absolutely zero effect on the actual file that's recorded. So the first thing in here is clean feed. This is a term that we use a lot to describe a video signal that has no settings or icons or warnings or anything on top of it. So if I turn on clean feed and then go back to exit the menu, you'll see there's no settings, there's no battery indicator, there's nothing on the screen. So this is great for either live streaming or for sending out a feed for a client to watch on a monitor, for example. So if you want to just make sure that there's no distractions from your shot, turn on clean feed. A helpful note is that can also be done by swiping on the screen. So if I just swipe my finger up or down, I think left or right also does it. Nope, that's a different thing I'll talk about later. If you swipe up or down, it'll show and hide those menus, and that is exactly the same thing as turning on clean feed. So I'll just turn those back on. The second option is display 3D LUT. And what that will do is turn on the colors to sort of preview a certain color profile. So you'll see now that's like really, really contrast. The colors are very bright. If I turn that off, it's much more natural. So we'll talk more about LUTs when we get there in the last page, but there's a quick shortcut to turn those on and off. Most of the rest of these, in fact, yeah, all of the rest of these are just on-off switches for the same functions that we got in the very first part of the menu. So these all have their on-off switches here. These all match the same settings here. So just a different place to find them. Second over here.
Just go back one. Just tell me the settings that you think should be on the screen. Do this, 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 and this.
Yeah, so that's highly subjective.
It is.
Down to personal preference.
Okay.
I mean, the way that it's preset like this, I think is ideal.
Okay.
I'll just say that. So the decision of which tools like this you leave on or off is really up to you. Again, it has no influence on the recording, so it's just a matter of personal preference what tools you prefer to use. In my opinion, the most useful ones are focus assist and false color. So I would leave false color turned on. All these other ones, you can have them on or off if you choose, but the most important things to me when I'm shooting are I want to make sure it's in focus and I want to make sure that the exposure is correct so that I'm retaining detail in the whole shot. And that's what focus assist and false colors do. These other ones I'm going to leave on just because they're useful sometimes. And again, it's so quick and easy to change which ones are used here. You see I actually turned on false color in that menu, so false color is turned on right now. I'll turn that off right there. So you'll just kind of go through these and turn them on and off as needed while you're shooting. But these ones I prefer to keep, keep those handy. We've got a second page here, which is status text. So this is kind of similar to clean feed, but it's not as extreme. So status text is turned on right now. If I turn it off, it'll turn off all of the indicators and icons and such on the screen, but it would still let other things like false color show. So if I turn on false color and I have the status text still turned off, you'll see that false color works, but it doesn't have the settings and icons and everything else there. Frankly, I'm not sure why that's an option. I can't really imagine a situation where I'd want that to be used, so I would just leave that turned on and make sure that you can see your recording settings and you can see all of your exposure and stuff like that. We now have two displays where this is in the bottom right corner of the screen. We have meters, which is our audio meters. We'll talk about that in the next page. You can also change that to codec and resolution. So if you wanted to, you can have that right down here, and that way, no matter what, it's really easy to tell exactly what your settings are. So we've got Blackmagic RAW and Ultra HD. So this is useful in a case where maybe throughout the course of a project, you're changing those settings. Maybe for some shots you want Ultra HD, and for some shot you want regular HD. So this is a handy way to be able to just double check really quick without going into a menu that your settings are right. I personally rarely change my codec and resolution settings. So I leave meters on. That lets me have the histogram and audio meters, which for the way that I work and for the way that most of you will be working, these are much more useful tools to have. And last thing here is screen brightness, which I think is quite self-explanatory. 50% is just fine for me. If I'm shooting outside, I might turn it up, but I rarely go less than 50%, just because you can lose some detail. It makes it harder to see those details. And usually when you're indoors, 50% is fine. So moving on to HDMI, you'll see that these settings are exactly the same, more or less, except you don't have the brightness for HDMI because the brightness for your screen would be controlled on that screen itself, so there's no brightness there. And the only other change is it goes from cinematographer to director. This just changes some of the text and information that's on the screen. As long as this is turned off, it doesn't make a difference. And for the most part, you'll prefer to have a clean feed there anyway, just so that it shows with no distractions on that screen. This is especially true if you're live streaming from the camera or going into a ATEM mini switcher. So you don't want to have your battery life and record time baked into your footage. It doesn't look good at all. So we'll leave the clean feed turned on and everything else can be turned off. Finally, we have some settings for both. And these are settings that apply to both LCD and HDMI. So these are things like your frame guides, which again, you can change in this setting up here. Got our frame guides right there. Right now it's set to 4:5. If I just change it to something else, you'll see that's reflected there because it's the same setting. And the opacity for those guides. So this will show you, let's see if I go up to 100, you'll see that there's now nothing there because they're 100% opaque. Or I guess they label that kind of strangely, but anyway. Oh, if I turn that on, that would probably work better. There we go. I had that turned off. So at 25% opacity, they're dimly there. You can still pretty clearly see through them. If I go up to 100% opacity, they'll be solid black. So I prefer to keep this, if you're using frame guides, 25 or 50%. It's more of a personal preference thing, but that makes sure that you can still see what's happening past the sides of your image. We now have focus assist level. So if I go back in here, we have the focus assist right there. It's the same setting in here again, just in a different spot. See, that was reflected when I changed it from medium to high. And right here, you can change the color of the focus assist. So if I go back in here, I'm going to turn off false color to make this easier to see. You'll remember that we had red lines, and you can see them right there on the pineapple and on the avocado. This lets you change that color. So in this case, the red is a little hard to see against there. I prefer something like blue. So I'll change that to blue. And that's now much more visible against the colors of the avocado. And up here, we have colored lines or peak. So colored lines is, well, this that we're changing right now, versus peak, which does essentially a very strong sharpening effect. So I prefer peaking over the colored lines, mostly because I find the colors to be a little distracting. And peaking still makes it quite easy to see. I'm not sure how well it's coming across on the video, but in real life, looking at the screen, it is very easy to tell where that area of sharpness is. So that's the tool that I prefer. So we're just going to walk through setting up the Bluetooth control through the Blackmagic Camera Control app. So first thing we have to do is, again, we'll hit that menu button, and then under Setup, looks like we're on page 4, you have the Bluetooth switch. So we'll turn that on, and right there, we have our number that ends in A01C, so that matches right there. There's the number we're looking for. So all you have to do is hit the button on the tablet, and it connects. So in just a moment, they're gonna do a little handshake, and then we'll get lots of different controls, primarily exposure and white balance controls, and also a start and stop recording. It usually takes about a minute or so when they first get connected, and then once they're already set up, they'll connect almost immediately after this point. So we're going to show, again, installing and formatting a memory card so we can save some presets on it. So we'll pop open the door, it just slides out toward the back. I find it's easiest to kind of grab right there and use that as a little bit of leverage. It'll pop open because it's spring-loaded. The memory card slides right in the slot and clicks in place, and push the door closed. So now on the screen, we've got, you see it says 17 minutes there, and this one is now lit up blue as opposed to the gray one, so we know that there's a card installed. We can click on that. Looks like there's some stuff on here. That's okay to format, right? Okay. So we have some footage that was on here from a previous shoot. We can delete that, so we'll format. Again, because we're using Macs in this case, OS X Extended. If you're using Windows, exFAT is the better system for that. Just make sure your files are easier to read on the computer. Choose Format Card, confirm that we want to format it, and finally press and hold for 3 seconds. The reason there's so many kind of steps to that is because formatting will erase everything on the memory card. So they really want to make sure that you're really certain that you want to format it and don't accidentally do it. On some cameras, it's just one button to click it, and it's really easy to accidentally lose everything, so that's a nice little sort of safety feature there to make sure you don't delete your footage. So if we go back into our preset menu, we made that one called Studio. That's actually saved to the camera itself, but now we've installed a memory card. So let's say I've got 2 of these cameras, and I want them to match perfectly. So I'll go in here, and you can make your preset, same as we did before. So we'll call this one maybe Studio 2. You hit that little number icon to get to your numbers here. So now Studio 2 is saved right there. What I can do is, well, first I'll kind of talk about what's down here. So the bottom left, the plus icon lets you save a new preset, as we've done with those 2. The check mark will load whatever preset is selected. So if I click on Studio 2 and hit the check mark, it's now applied all of those settings to the camera. So my color settings are as they were before because I just made that preset. If I go back to Studio and load that, these were the old settings. So these have the cropped right there, the frame guides, the different white balance. You see the horizon is turned on right there. And again, if I go back to Studio 2, all those settings are different. So as I mentioned before, this changes essentially every setting in the camera. So if I click on that again, this one lets you resave that. So let's say I'm in Studio 2 right now, but I kind of want to have, maybe my lighting's changed and I need to change my white balance. So if I make that a little bit warmer, I can go in here, click that, and it'll ask me, do you want to update preset Studio 2 with current settings? So if I update that, it just resaves whatever settings may have changed in the meantime and resaves that Studio 2 preset with those new settings. Second to last one down here lets you move it between the camera and the memory cards. So if I click on Studio 2, so it's highlighted, I can now move that and I can import it or I can export it. So what importing will let you do is anything that's saved on the memory card, you can bring it from the memory card to the camera itself. So that way when you change that memory card, the preset stays with the camera. In this case, what I want to do is export that. So again, there's 2 memory card slots. Card 1 is the CFast, but we're not using that. We're using an SD card in card 2. So I can export to card 2. It'll export it. And now I could just take this memory card out, plug it into a different Blackmagic camera, and load that preset on here. So what I'm actually going to do is delete this preset. Mostly to demonstrate that that's what this trash can icon does. So you click on it to select it, trash can and confirm that you want to delete it. Now, it's saying that we don't have any presets, so you can create them or import them using your card. So I'm going to plug this card back in and use that import menu here to import a preset. And you can see this is now available because it's saved on that memory card. So I can import that. And now, if I unplug the card again, the preset stays there. So this is a great way to synchronize multiple cameras to make sure that everything matches, and also to back up your settings. Because, once you've made your preset, you save it to the camera. What happens if at some point you kick your tripod and it breaks the camera? Well, you have to remake all those settings. So in the event that something bad happens to the camera, this lets you make sure that you can get those settings back without any trouble at all. I'll just put that card back in. And the last page on here is LUTs. So LUT stands for lookup table. It just says LUTs here because that's plural. And this is a standard that's used all throughout the video production, broadcasting, and filmmaking world for essentially color settings. So you can think of these like the professional version of Instagram filters, where each one of these applies a different sort of look and color settings to your footage. Again, keep in mind that since we're recording RAW, the LUT will be saved alongside the footage, but it doesn't actually directly affect it. So you can go at any time and add or remove LUTs. You can change the LUT. You can add multiple LUTs on top of each other to add multiple different effects. But this is a way to change which ones are saved along with your footage, so that once you import them to your editing software, what you see there matches what you previewed on the camera. So before, when we were talking under the monitor section, I had suggested, it's into the record menu. I'd suggested using extended video. And again, the reason for that is because it's a great balance of looking nice on the screen and giving you an accurate preview of what your final shot looks like. But the video setting, which does more of that, loses a little bit of detail in the bright and dark regions. So extended video lets you keep some of that detail in your preview. And you'll notice that Pocket 4K Film to Extended Video is one of the presets that we have here. So let's say that I wanted to shoot film because, say I'm handing it off to an experienced editor who is good with color correction and they know and are comfortable with working with this low contrast image. If I want them to have that directly, what the LUTs menu lets you do is choose how to preview that footage. So if I choose the Pocket 4K Film to Extended Video LUT, that's one that's already loaded right now, so there's no option to change that. But if I choose a different one, like Film to Video, and apply this, now if I go into my settings here, and it'll actually be in the monitor menu, if I turn on Display 3D LUT, so I went into the LUTs menu and I loaded this Pocket 4K Film to Video. So that's now the LUT that the camera is going to use. If I turn on the 3D LUT, then I'm now seeing that look previewed on the screen. If I turn it off, it goes back to the desaturated film style. So this is something that lets you preview what a look would look like, only affecting the monitor on the camera, not affecting the footage that's recorded. Once again, there's no harm in leaving extended video or even video turned on if you find that that looks better for your setup. Usually extended video is the best compromise. So there's no harm in doing that. You can always go back and turn it off once you bring it into your editing software. But if you prefer to shoot film, this lets you preview a different look in the camera. And just like with our presets, you can import and export these LUTs in exactly the same way. So what we do sometimes at my studio for live streaming is we will shoot some test footage of the actual set, and then I'll give it to either an editor or sometimes I do it myself, bring it into DaVinci Resolve and do a full color correction, color grade, dial in really nice looking color settings, export that LUT from DaVinci Resolve, put it on a memory card, import it to the camera, and then the footage that's recorded and more importantly sent out to our live stream, already has those color settings applied. So it's a great time saver and a way to increase image quality while you're shooting. And that, if I'm not mistaken, is every single option and every single button for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. And the great thing about these is these settings are very, very similar, if not identical, to every other Blackmagic camera. So if you decide to go for a 6K model or an Ursa Mini or a older Pocket HD camera, they are all basically the same. So that's that.
And the crowd goes wild.
Indeed.